Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our goal, as always, is to give you a rich understanding of some really fascinating material, respecting your time but aiming for real insight. Today, we're diving into Zadig, Oriental History. It's a book that, well, our source material says was a big deal back when tales from the East were really in vogue.
That's right. Apparently, a figure named OU found it, both interesting and instructive, which he seemed to prefer over, let's say, the less sensible stories some sultanas enjoyed at the time. It hints at a taste for arrogance, maybe?
Yeah, substance over fluff. And the author, Zadig, he actually dedicates it to a patroness of wisdom.
Right.
Hoping she'll go for solid sense rather than, quote, senseless romances. He even compares her to Thalestris and the Queen of Sheba. Pretty lofty comparisons.
It definitely sets expectations high, doesn't it? Suggests the book is aiming for some serious wisdom.
It does. And then there's this funny bit, the approbation. It seems it was written by someone who was initially mortified by the book.
Mortified? Why?
Well, because it was amusing and moral and philosophical all at once. So much so, he felt he had to warn the Kadileski about it.
Huh. So it's like a backhanded compliment. This book is dangerously good.
Exactly. Makes you really curious about what could be so, compelling, yet maybe a bit shocking.
And the chapter titles give you a clue. You glance at the contents.
Yeah, the blind eye, the nose, the dog and the horse. They don't sound like your typical chapter headings.
Not at all. And it goes on. The envious man, the force of generosity, the just judge. It really signals we're going on a journey through human nature, all sorts of situations.
So problems, morality, nature itself.
Looks like it, all seen through Zadig's eyes and experiences.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. Let's explore these opening chapters of Zadig's story and dig out those surprising insights and observations the text offers.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Maybe with Zadig himself.
Perfect. Let's unpack Zadig. Who is this guy?
Well, the text introduces him as a young Babylonian. He's got wealth, noble birth, the usual advantages, you might say.
Okay.
But what really makes him stand out is his character. He's got uncommon genius, a good education, sure, but he also keeps his passions in check. He's not arrogant.
That's interesting. You'd almost expect someone like that to be a bit full of himself.
Right. But no, he's described as indulgent of others' weaknesses, their foibles. And witty, yes, but never mean-spirited or mocking, especially not in, polite company, that he found a bit shallow anyway.
Grounded.
Very. And there's this early influence mentioned, Zoroaster.
The ancient Persian prophet.
Exactly. His teachings about good thoughts, words, deeds, they clearly shaped Zadig. There's a specific quote mentioned from Zoroaster's first book.
Oh, yeah.
It says, self-love is like a bladder full-blown, which when once pricked, discharges a kind of petty tempest.
Wow. That's quite an image for ego.
Isn't it? And it connects to his generosity, too. He helps people, even ungrateful ones.
What's that?
Another maxim from Zoroaster, apparently. Feed the dogs under the table, even the annoying ones, so they don't bite you later.
Huh. Practical wisdom, then. A little kindness as, preventative maintenance.
Pretty much. It shows this pragmatic side. He also prefers sensible company, we're told, and knows a lot about Chaldean sciences, astronomy, math.
Ah, the stuff Babylonia was famous for.
Right.
Right.
But interestingly, it says his grasp of metaphysics was little or nothing. He seems more focused on the observable, the tangible.
Makes sense. And then there's the really fascinating part, his scientific beliefs.
Oh, yeah. This is great. He believed the year was 365 and a quarter days long, and that the sun was at the center of the earth, which, went against what everyone else, especially the Magi, believed back then.
Seriously countercultural for the time. Yeah. How did he handle the pushback?
Well, that's telling, too. The Magi disapproved, but Zadig, it says he knew how to sit still and quiet.
No big arguments.
Nope. Just quiet confidence, maybe. Like he trusted his own observations even against authority. Perhaps that helped him later.
So let's recap Zadig. Rich, smart, handsome, healthy, good-hearted, lots of friends. He thinks he can achieve perfect happiness.
He really does. Seems to have it all. And then enters Samira.
His intended bride. Beautiful, high-born, rich, and they genuinely love each other. Grounded on honor, it says.
Sounds perfect. Too perfect, maybe. They're about to get married, taking a walk by the river.
And bam, ambush. Orkan's guards.
Right. Orkan, nephew of some minister. And he's purely motivated by jealousy and vanity.
He doesn't have any of Zadig's qualities, but his uncle's position gives him power and arrogance. Classic envy story.
Totally. Orkin thinks he's in love with Samira, probably just because his ego got bruised, and decides to just take her. No respect at all.
The attack sounds nasty. Samira gets hurt, but she's screaming about Zadig's safety.
And Zadig, even though he's outnumbered just him and 2 servants, he fights them off, defends her.
She must have been incredibly grateful.
Oh, absolutely. Afterwards, she's pouring out her love, saying he saved her life, her honor. Their bond seems really strong in that moment.
But there's always a but, isn't there? Things go wrong.
They do. Zadig got wounded more seriously than they thought. An arrow grazed his eye, left a deep wound.
Ouch. And then the doctor arrives.
Hermes.
The famous physician Hermes, yes. Comes in, full of confidence, and declares the wound incurable. Total loss of the eye. If it's the right eye, that is.
And it was the right eye.
Well, we assume so, but plot twist. Zadig actually recovers. Some kind of abscess, an impostumen, breaks, and he heals on his own.
So Hermes was wrong.
Completely. But does he admit it? No way. He writes this massive treatise arguing why Zadig shouldn't have healed.
You're kidding?
Nope. Pure ego saving. Zadig, meanwhile, couldn't care less about the treatise. He's just happy to be healing and thinking about Samira.
And she?
Here's the kicker. He recovers, goes to see her, only to find out she's developed this implacable aversion to a one-eyed man.
What? Just like that, because of his eye?
Just like that. Total, sudden revulsion based purely on his appearance, and worse. She's marrying Orkin that very night. Oh, that's brutal. After everything. What a commentary on, well, superficiality, I guess, and maybe social pressure.
It's incredibly cruel,
Yeah.
and Zadig is absolutely devastated. The text says he almost dies from the emotional pain. A real gut punch showing how fragile happiness can be.
A harsh lesson. Fickle fortune, fickle hearts. But he does recover eventually.
He does. He's resilient, he reflects, pulls himself together, and then makes a very pragmatic choice. He marries Azora, described as a substantial citizen's daughter.
Okay, moving on. Perhaps seeking something more stable.
Yeah.
Which brings us to chapter 2. The nose. Uh-oh. What happens with Azora?
Well, maybe Zadig hoped for less drama this time. But Azora, she's sweet in public, but apparently they quarrel a lot at home. A different kind of trouble, maybe.
How so?
Well, she seems intensely jealous, for one. Flies into a rage because Zadig's servants were just entertaining some young men. It points to a real insecurity, maybe possessiveness.
Not a great sign.
Not really. And she's quite judgmental, too.
Yeah.
There's this story about her visiting a widow named Khosru. Khosru is making a big public show of grieving her husband, vowing to stay by his tomb forever. But Azora immediately assumes the widow's secretly planning something selfish, like diverting a river near the tomb.
Wow, quick to judge. And maybe projecting her own stuff.
Perhaps. It definitely paints Azora as cynical, maybe obsessed with virtue signaling while suspecting the worst in others. It's a setup showing her character.
Right. Meanwhile, Zadig has his good friend Kador, who has a genuinely virtuous wife. That must have been quite the contrast for Zadig.
You'd think so. And this contrast, well, it leads Zadig and Kador to cook up a rather elaborate plan.
Scheme. What kind?
Zadig gets Azora to go away for a couple of days. While she's gone, he confides in Kador.
Okay.
When Azora returns, the servants break the news. Zadig has died suddenly.
Oh, wow. How does she react?
Big drama, tears, wailing, vows to die right there beside him. Very theatrical.
Seems excessive.
Especially given what happens next. Kador comes to visit the widow, playing his part perfectly. They weep together for a bit. Then Kador reveals, oops, Zadig left him most of his money. And maybe, would she consider marrying him?
He proposes right there.
Pretty much. And Azora, her intense grief just evaporates. She's suddenly finding comfort in Kador's company, accepting his advances over supper.
Unbelievable. So much for dying by Zadig's side.
Yeah.
That's cynical.
Deeply cynical. It really highlights how performative grief can be, how self-interest pops right back up. But the test isn't over yet.
There's more.
Oh, yes. Zadig and Kador take it a step further. Kador pretends he's suddenly struck by a terrible, painful spasm.
Right.
And the only cure is the application of a dead man's nose. Specifically, a man who died recently.
A dead man's nose.
Yeah.
You're serious. Where does that come from?
It's bizarre. The text throws in a mention of a famous physician, Arnon, and his infallible apoplectic necklaces just before this, maybe poking fun at quack medicine.
Okay, so Kador needs a nose.
Yeah.
And Zadig is conveniently dead nearby.
Exactly. And Zora, desperate to prove her newfound love for Kador and believing Zadig is truly dead,
Don't tell me.
she grabs a razor and heads to Zadig's coffin, fully prepared to cut off his nose for her new suitor.
No. That's horrifying. More horrifying than diverting a river, that's for sure.
Way more intimate and, frankly, cruel. The text makes that comparison explicitly. It's the ultimate proof of her inconstancy, her willingness to mutilate her husband for her own immediate desires.
Wow. Zadig certainly found out what she was really like. So, divorce, I assume.
You bet. He repudiates her, as the text says. Which leads us to Chapter 3, The Dog and the Horse. After all that betrayal, he needs a change.
Understandably, where does he turn?
To nature, to study and philosophy. We get another quote from the Book of Zend reflecting his experience.
What's this one?
That the first month of marriage is the honeymoon and that the second is the wormwood moon.
Sounds about right based on his aura. Wormwood is bitter, right?
Very. So he's disillusioned with relationships and seeks solace elsewhere. He thinks, who is happier than the philosopher who peruses with understanding that spacious book laid before our eyes? Meaning the book of nature.
A shift from people to, well, reality. Facts. Observations.
Exactly. He avoids trivial stuff and gets really deep into studying plants and animals. He develops this incredible power of observation, noticing tiny details others miss.
And this skill comes into play, I gather.
Big time. He's out minding his own business when he runs into the queen's chief eunuch and a whole bunch of huntsmen. They're in a total panic.
Why? What's happened?
They've lost the queen's darling little dog, her bitch, and even worse, the king's best horse, his palfrey. They're searching everywhere.
Okay. And Zadig.
I ask him if he's seen them. He says no, he hasn't seen them. But he can describe them perfectly just from looking at the tracks in the sand.
Get out. How?
It's amazing. For the horse, he deduces its height, that it had tiny hooves, a really long tail, that its bit had gold studs of a certain size, and its shoes were silver of a specific weight, all from the tracks.
That's like ancient forensics. What about the dog?
Same thing. He figures out it was a female, had recently had puppies, had very long ears that swept the sand, and was slightly lame in her left front paw.
Just from footprints. That's incredible observational power.
Isn't it? And the punchline is, they find both animals later, and Zadig's descriptions are spot on, perfect in every single detail.
So everyone's amazed, right? He's hailed as a genius.
Well, not quite. Initially, the judges are just baffled. How could he possibly know all that?
Yeah, how?
But then suspicion creeps in. They think, wait, if he knew that much detail, he must have seen them. He must be lying about not seeing them. Maybe he stole them.
Oh, come on. That's completely unfair.
Totally unfair. It's a real indictment of how sometimes, people react to things they don't understand with suspicion instead of admiration. Even today, maybe.
So what happens? They arrest him.
They fine him. 400 ounces of gold. A huge sum. For lying about not seeing the animals he described so accurately without seeing them. The irony.
That's absurd. Can he appeal?
Yes. He pays a fine first, then gets a hearing before the Grand Desterham. And there, he gives this brilliant defense.
How does he explain it?
He just lays it out logically, step by step. How the spacing of the tracks told him the horse's gait, how faint lines showed the tail sweeping, how tiny marks revealed the bit studs, how the depth of the hoof prints related to the shoe weight. Same for the dog. The disturbed sand showed where her udders dragged, the long ear marks, the uneven paw prints showing the limp.
Wow. He basically taught them how to see.
Exactly. And the judges are completely won over. Impressed. The king and queen hear about it and are astonished, too.
Okay, now he gets recognized, right?
Sort of. The king orders the fine returned, minus court fees, naturally.
Always the fees.
But there's still this undercurrent of danger. Some of the magi, the establishment figures, mutter that he must be a sorcerer and should be burned.
Just for being observant and smart. That's chilling.
It really is. It shows how threatening deep insight can be to established ignorance or power.
So Zadig gets his money back, mostly. But what's the lesson he takes away from this whole mess?
Well, the chapter ends with him reflecting on it all, and he comes to the rather bleak conclusion that often being too clever is precisely what brings misfortune down on your head.
Oof. Being smart is dangerous. That's a downer.
It is a pretty powerful and maybe disheartening thought to end that part of his story. These first few chapters really set a pattern, don't they?
They absolutely do. So, if we're boiling it down, Leonard, the key takeaways from Zadig's early life seem to be, well, first, the pain of betrayal and love. That hits hard.
Definitely. And related to that, how superficial appearances can be, how quickly things change, Samira's sudden aversion, Azora's fake grief.
Right. And then this latest incident, the danger that comes with just being perceptive, with wisdom itself. As Zadig figures, cleverness can actually attract trouble.
Yeah, it's this mix of Bad luck, human fallibility, both others and maybe his own initial naivety and the world just not being ready for or being suspicious of his kind of insight.
Which leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it? Thinking about Zadig's intelligence, his virtue, because he's fundamentally decent, and his search for happiness. What does his story suggest about how those things relate in a world that's just full of random twists and unreliable people?
Can you actually be happy, truly happy, when things are so unpredictable? When even your best qualities might backfire? It's a tough one.
Makes you think about life's ironies, right? Have you ever seen situations where someone's talent or intelligence seemed to cause them problems? Or maybe something that looked like misfortune turned out okay in the end? Zadig's story certainly makes you ponder that.
It really does. And we know this is just the start. Looking back at this chapter titles.
Yeah, the envious man, the force of generosity, the just judge, the hermit, the riddles. It sounds like he's got a lot more adventures and probably misfortunes ahead of him.
Seems like we're set for more explorations of human nature, fate, justice, all sorts of big themes through his experiences. It definitely leaves you wanting to know what happens next to this smart but seemingly cursed guy.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the beginning of Zadig's journey. We hope this look at the early chapters gives you a good feel for the insights and the flavor of the original text. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Until next time.